Well, it's amazing what a week can bring you. I was out here in shorts and t-shirt last week. This week, I'm in a jacket and my jeans are back on. Ugh. Fall is definitely fallen. I want to talk today about the book of Ruth. It's a short little book, oftentimes gets overlooked in the Old Testament. It's only about 4 chapters. And it's this story of this young lady. And we need to pay attention to it because it's one of the few stories in the Bible that center the main characters are all women. And so it is something we need to pay attention to and study. And you probably have skipped over it or are not seen it. And if you have not read the book of Ruth lately, I encourage you to go read it. It's a short read. It won't take you more than 30 minutes to read the whole thing. And it's a great little story. And it's about this ideal society. It's about an ideal society where people are following God's commands. And the thing we need to realize, and I think the thing that oftentimes when we're talking about ideal society or idealism, is that we think that everything's got to be perfect. And if everything's not perfect, then it's not, ideal, right? Well, the truth is that life is rarely perfect. And so that this book in the Bible, this book of Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi, it doesn't start or have, it's not perfect from beginning to end. It ends well, but there are a lot of hardships and a lot of pain and a lot of just bad things happening in this story that you would think, well, and this is supposed to be of an ideal society. Well, it is in an ideal society mixed amongst a bunch of flawed people. So it starts off Naomi, and I'm going to get the names right this week because I've written them down on a piece of paper, not like last week where you switch the 2 names. Talk about not being an ideal society. Well, it starts off with Naomi and her husband, Elimelech. That's one heck of a name. Can you imagine him in kindergarten? They are trying to escape a famine. And so they go to Moab, trying to escape a famine because they've heard that there's food there, that you can grow food. And so they make their way from Bethlehem to Moab. And things are going good until Naomi's husband, Elimelech, dies. But she has 2 sons, and they've brought these 2 sons with them. And so she's good as a widow in her society. If you didn't have sons as a widow, you were not in a good shape. But she has 2 sons, and these 2 sons, they take wives, Moab wives. And so they have a family there. Naomi with her 2 daughters-in-law, and her 2 sons. And things are going good for a while. And all in all, they live in Moab for about 10 years. We're not sure how long the sons were married or how long it was they were there before Naomi's husband died. But all in all, they were there for 10 years. And within those 10 years, the husband dies and then the 2 sons die. So Naomi she's in trouble. She is a widower, and she is a widower without any sons. And all she's got are these 2 daughters-in-law who have had no children yet. And so not only is Naomi in trouble, but her 2 daughters-in-law are in trouble. And her daughters-in-law are named Orpah, is how it's pronounced, it's spelled in the Bible, or Orpah, and then Ruth. And so Naomi decides that she needs to go back to her hometown. It's not going to be good for her as a widower. Back in those times, if you were a woman without a man, without a husband, without sons to take care of you, you were vulnerable. And so these 3 women are very well aware of the fact how vulnerable they are in this society. And so Naomi decides to go back to Bethlehem. And on the way back, she says to her daughters-in-law, y'all should go back to your families, have them take care of you, because I don't know what's in store for me in Bethlehem. It's going to be a hard road to hoe. They don't want to go. They've come to love Naomi as a mother, and so they resist, and Naomi insists, and finally Orpah decides she's going to go back to her family. But Ruth, on the other hand, she's not going to have it. She is not going to leave. She clings, we are told, to Naomi. And Naomi has essentially become her mother. And she sits there and states that, hey, you are my mother. Your people are now my people. I'm staying with you no matter what. And Naomi realizes that Ruth is with her. And so they head back to Bethlehem, and thus the story continues. And it's not all easy. It's not all filled with ideal situations. It starts off, Naomi feels like she's sort of cursed. She's being cursed by God. She is being given these hardships that she really doesn't deserve, and she states that as much when she gets back to Bethlehem. What's important in this story, other than the fact that these are women in the Bible, and so we need to pay attention to them and recognize their strength, and recognize the situation they are in, and recognize the fact that they are continue to be faithful, and they cling to one another, and that God is faithful throughout the entire story. This idea that this is an ideal society does not mean it's perfect. Does not mean it's without hardship. But that commitment, the commitment of God to God's people, and the people to God, and the people to each other, that given in that commitment, ideal things can happen. Ruth is not going to leave Naomi. She is committed to being her daughter, not going to leave her alone. And it is her commitment to hard work that will get her noticed in Bethlehem by a relative of Naomi's, and things will work out. It is the commitment of God to help God's people find a way through this famine that is making everybody rush around like chickens with their heads cut off trying to find food. What this is, and Wesley talked about this, John Wesley, he was the founder of Methodism, sort of, developed the Methodist way of being. So I guess you could say he was the founder, although he wasn't trying to find Methodism at the time. He was just trying to find a way to be more in connection with God. Would call this practical divinity or practical theology. This is the idea that our faith and our relationship with God and how we define that relationship, our theology, does not live in a vacuum. It is not an academic pursuit solely. It is not something, we do not sit there and think about our faith and our theology and go, well, that was a great little mind experiment. Now let me get back to my real life. Wesley, in his idea of practical divinity, practical theology, is espousing that our faith and our relationship with God and our lives that we live out here in the world are not two separate things. That when we leave the church on Sunday or Saturday or Friday or Wednesday, whenever you worship, when we leave that sanctuary and that church of worship, that God does not just stay in that building, that our faith and our theology do not just stay in that building, they go with us into the world. And that we are, as followers of Christ, are called to implement that theology that we've learned, that we've studied, that we've noodled on for a while into our real lives. That means we are to live into our faith. We are to live into how God is calling us. What it really means is that you can't be holy on Sunday and then on Monday cussing up a storm in traffic. Those are diametrically opposed. And Wesley is saying that we must live out our faith in the world. And that is what God is calling us to do, to live out this practical theology, this practical way of living in the world. And as you read Ruth, you realize that this is the ideal society that they're talking about, that the people of God are living out their faith and their relationship with God within the real world. It's not always clean. It's not always perfect. It's not always fun and filled with no pain. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's dirty, it's messy, it's rarely perfect, it's filled with a great deal of pain and wondering what's going to happen and not being sure, but having faith and a commitment to that faith that God's got this, that it will work out as long as we live our theology, our faith, out in the world. And that means we have to sort of realize that everything that we do, every action that we make, every conversation that we have is essentially theological. It is essentially inviting God into our lives and accepting God into our lives and living in God through our lives. I love this idea of practical theology. I love this idea that our faith just doesn't get left at the building or at the pile of books. You see, I could point to all the sermons that I've preached and say to you, hey, I know a lot about God, therefore you must listen to me. I could point to all the course of studies that I've taken and say, look, I've learned a lot about God, you need to listen to me. I could sit there and go, I go to church every Sunday religiously and this close with God, so you need to listen to me. They talk about that in the Bible. There's this verse, and it's something about a clanging bell. That if you're not living with love in your heart or love for other people, and you're espousing all of these ways that you need to be and you should be this if you love God, that you're nothing but a clanging bell. And what Wesley is telling us is that in this practical theology and this practical divinity, that it's better to show people than to tell people. That it's better to love fully than to be a clanging bell. And so we live into this practical theology, and it's not going to be neat, it's not going to be pretty, it's going to be messy. And we live into this mess that we call life. And when we realize that we are broken people living into this mess, and so we're oftentimes making the mess worse, but we cling, like Ruth clung to Naomi. We cling to a faith, to our God, and we cling to the idea that if we follow God, if we follow our faith, if we live out our theology in our lives, that we too will live in an ideal society, that we too will live into what God is calling us to be, how God is calling us to be, where God is calling us to be. And it's going to take some doing. And we're not going to be perfect. And we're going to doubt sometimes, like Naomi doubted whether or not God had forsaken her. And we're going to have to do more studying. And we're going to have to do more learning. And we're going to go out and we're going to fail. And we're going to get back up again. And we're going to fail again. And it might take us 100 times to get it right. But as long as we cling to that faith tightly, as long as we trust that God's got this, it will work out. Maybe not in the timing that we want it to work out. I mean, look, it took 10 years for Naomi and her family to find a way through the famine. And then all the men died. All the men died. And so they came back to Bethlehem and they finally were able to find a way out of there. But look how much it cost Naomi to find that freedom. So my friends, as you go into this week, I encourage you to read the story of Ruth. It's a great read. You won't be sorry, I promise you. Of the Old Testament, it's probably one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament. Encourage you to read Ruth. Encourage you to look at how you are living your life. Are you living your theology out in your life practically? Or is theology something up here that you don't oftentimes think about? Maybe we need to bring it down here and place it here, in our hearts. Go and be practical theologians to everyone that you meet. Express your faith and your love and your trust in God. Try to use words as little as possible. Use your actions. Live out your faith in your life every single day. And I promise you, your life will be changed. And I guarantee you, others' lives will be changed too. I hope that this video finds you well and you continue to stay safe. I hope that you're enjoying this fall weather when it's not raining, although we did need the rain. And know that you are loved. Know that you are loved by a God who loves you with so reckless of abandon that it boggles the mind. I'm praying for each and every one of you. Amen.